Welcome to the Wicked Podcast, where we read the business books you don't have the time for. I'm Marcus Kirsch.
And I'm Troy Norcross.
And we are your co-hosts for the Wicked Podcast.
We take from the thousands of business books out there and test the author's ideas by comparing them to real-world challenges. With over 40 years of projects between us, we've got quite a bit to compare against. We give you the condensed takeaways, followed by our review with the authors.
We know you want actions, not theories, and it's actions that we want to help shape, because that's what the Wicked Podcast is all about, helping you to become a wicked company.
So, Marcus, who's on the show today?
Well, today we have both of our dear friend Minter Dial here with his new book, You Lead, which I think is his fourth book, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong, or we corrected in the notes. Great book. He said it took him 3 tries or something, or it took him nearly 6 years to bring this all together. So there's a lot in there. Super interesting book. Tons of stuff, especially for leaders to lead and for maybe other people to know as well.
Yeah.
Who they are and how they should bring themselves into organizations. So lovely chat. However, what were your takeaways and potential actions you would advise your clients to take from the book into reality?
I think when he was talking about authenticity and having a North Star and the way he described building a North Star and avoiding what I called the bubblegum trap, that was really important. So I think the advice that I would give a client is to really look at your vision, look at how you have a vision as a leader, and make sure that it has all of the right components. One of the key of which, the central of which is it's got to be personal. It's got to be able to stir and draw emotion in you in an authentic way that gets transmitted to your customers, to your employees, to your other stakeholders. I think that one was really, really key. The other one was kind of a segue conversation that happened at the end of the show. I thought was really, really great. And it is an opportunity that Minter is pointing out that we need more discourse, which is good, structured, constructive conversation on difficult topics. So whether that's gender bias, whether that's racism, whether that's, homosexuality, kind of discrimination, having those conversations and getting them out into the open is so important. So if you as an organization can create those kind of environments where the real genuine conversations can happen and have, as he said, diversity of ideas and not just diversity of gender and sexuality and race, that's when the magic happens. So those are my 2 big takeaways. What about you?
Yeah, well, I really loved the fact that some of the leadership aspects easily transfer to everybody else. In theory, in reality, there isn't actually any difference between whoever sits on top and everybody else in the organization. We're all people. One of the themes that has come out of many other books and people we talk to is that everyone has a bias. And I think it's better to know that we do, and it's better to admit that we do than not. Because that builds a better trusted environment and an acceptance that, people make mistakes. Even the leadership makes mistakes. And I think that's where that hook where you said personal comes in. So being more personal, I think really makes a good leader, even to the point where you're rather vulnerable than not. I think there's a big trend here that seems to be like, be more vulnerable, be more humble as a leader, and you will be the leader that the future needs, because it will create more authentic mission statements, North Stars, whatever you name it. And it's easier, it's braver and easier to stand up for. And I think that totally trickles all the way down into teams, wherever they are. Because I think, trusting yourself and speaking out and bringing your ideas and thoughts to the organization is essential, because it de-risks, it brings diversity, it creates a more holistic way of looking any solution, and it's proven to be very beneficial to organizations. So bringing yourself in, knowing you're biased, communicating that you have biases and that you're part of it, is great, and I think that's both appropriate for leaders and everybody else. So it runs through the organization. So it's a lovely thought. Be more personal. And I think that there's one thought I had that I didn't bring out in the interview, which is about. I read an article about exactly that. Seemingly, through all these Zoom calls that you take at home, you actually finally seeing people at home with their kids, with their partners, because someone's running through the background, just as in our interview, because Ilona came in and just joined us to ask me something. It connects you differently, and it's actually nice because it connects the human side. There's an authenticity there suddenly. I think that is a big value, and I think that helps how we work together as much as we are together as human beings. So I like the fact that everyone should take that personal aspect with them and be brave to embrace it. So I love that.
It was a really, really great interview. And speaking of, shall we go to the interview?
I think we should go to the interview. Hello, everyone. Today we have Minter Dial with us. Hello, Minter, and thanks for making time for us.
Hey, Marcus and Troy. Thanks for having me on.
Lovely. So we start at the top as usual. So please tell our listeners who you are and why you wrote your book.
Well, so my name is Minter Dial. I'm a bohemian itinerant, agent of change. I'm sure that's a good topic for you guys. I have I'm 56 years old. I've changed countries 15 times. I've changed homes 34 times. I've done 12 different métiers. And have only one wife, which I plan to keep. I'm a professional speaker otherwise. I've written, published 4 books. I've done 1 documentary film about the Second World War. And I continue to be thirsty for learning new things and exploring the future and new cultures.
That's quite an introduction.
Yeah.
I didn't cover the book, so
I was going to get back to that. Exactly. Can you tell us a bit about the book? And
well,
why
just
you wrote it?
in short order, this is a book that I actually began in 2014. At the time, I considered it my book, the book. Sometimes we always say we have a book in us, and I started it. It took 4 different moments for me to conclude this book. And it really felt like it was as much the apotheosis of my professional and personal lives put together in this book. And that's what I wanted to do. And really, ultimately, each of my efforts is attempting to try to bring about change for good through leadership and business. And hopefully this is a book that will lead towards that too.
And that's quite a good inspiration. As you know, we had a number of questions that we kind of generated in the process of reading the book. Which was really a very enjoyable Sunday afternoon sort of read for me. So I really, really appreciate it because, I mean, I know you and Marcus and I and you all 3 have the one thing in common, which is the Innovation Warehouse, of course, because that's where we all kind of met independently and together. But jumping into the questions, you talk about ethics in business, and I think they're really, really important. And how doing the right thing is indeed a profitable thing to do kind of in the long run. But we find so many times that people who have less than stellar ethics, I won't say they're unethical, but less than stellar ethics, getting ahead and making progress and advancing. And how do you maintain good ethical business practices in an enterprise when your competition doesn't fly to the same standard?
So the answer is that's what they're choosing to do. You have to choose what you want to do. And what is the legacy you wish to have? If you want to go out and be a mass murderer, it's not very difficult. You can go out and do it. There are consequences. And in today's world, rather than sort of be bombastic about the type of criminal activity, transparency is a reality. And so just from a pragmatic standpoint, if you do shit that's bad, there's a chance that you'll be outed. More importantly, as another real motivating reason why you need to bring your ethical backbone into the business is that your employees get it. They know it. And if you are interested in having engaged employees over the long haul, then you better up your ethical game. And so really, I think it's not just about being nice and kumbaya and let's do nice things and do the right thing. There's some really pragmatic reasons why you need to think about it. And then afterwards, if you don't think about it up front, it'll get ahead of you.
Mm.
In other words, and specifically, when you're looking at coding AI, if you don't bring an ethical framework into the coding of AI, where many companies are obviously looking at that, it's going to go balmy, and people won't know that they shouldn't do that.
And I think that what you're really driving at is another thing that we really struggle with in general in capitalism, which is quarter-based thinking, really kind of short-termism as opposed to having a long-term view. You talk about really great concepts of legacy, and what's going to happen in 10 years when we finish doing the AI development and training the AI. How do we manage bias and all of those things? So it's always encouraging to hear that there are indeed people setting the standard and educating leaders that it's more than just next quarter's numbers that matter. And we're seeing transformation in leadership. And I think it's a great thing.
It does depend on the governance model you have. And if you are going to get fired or you're going to go out of business in the following month, then you do need to think about your ethics in a different way, because you go out of business just because you're ethical. Well, that's not a great business. So being pragmatic is a key ingredient, but you have to know where your stick in the mud is. And you need to do that a little bit ahead of time, because ultimately, of course, it's not just you who's running the company. You've got financial dudes or dudettes that might be fudging things, or you might have people and salespeople who are promising things that they can't deliver. And you might get the number in today, but you'll pay the price down the road. So you got to be pragmatic, because I'm all about, you got to survive. And if you can think about these things more upfront and prepare for them, for example, make sure you have a cash nest egg upfront. Write your ethical principles when it's good, so that when the shit hits the storm, you actually already know where you need to go and how you're going to navigate through the difficult situation.
And storm and navigate leads us really nicely onto this exercise of setting your North Star. I mean, that was a really, really great section of the book, and the process of taking your vision and your priorities and merging them together to become what your North Star setting is, and give you that direction to steer you through those choppy waters. I do know some people that try to do that, and they come up with what I call the bubblegum North Star. And as you say, employees can see that immediately, the one that's bubblegum versus the one that's genuine. Can you say a few words about the North Star process and how to avoid the kind of the bubblegum trap?
Right. So definitely lots of bubblegum out there and lots of faux norths. So there are two things. One is there's corporate north, and then there's personal north. And a corporate north that looks good on a wall, printed in a annual report, isn't what it's about. You need to find a way to explain who you are with some kind of realism, a little bit smart at some level. Because if you're trying to say, well, we're going to solve the world, well, that's too big, that's irrelevant. It's perhaps nice. And there's a great yogurt company in America called Chobani. And their north is extremely realistic. They're not trying to do too much things. They're only selling yogurts. But the way they do it seems to be incarnated by the founder, and it feels real. And the reason why it feels real is the second reason, is that it's personal. A North Star that is sort of cosmetic or professional, but doesn't resonate down into the guts of the individuals, is bound to just be, bubblegum, to your point, but I would say unsticky otherwise. Because the one that really gets you is when it resonates with the individuals. And so the challenge is, from a leadership standpoint, is actually how much of you is invested in the corporate North Star. And you have at very least two different opposing ideas. One is the entrepreneur, whose blood and guts is invested in, and the name of her name is on the company. And the other one is a mercenary CEO, brought in either, or maybe brought up through the ranks, but isn't the founder. and so they co-opt the ideas. They might believe them, but they don't actually have it in their blood. And I like to use the word, are you prepared to pass the brand tattoo test?
I love
So
that.
the brand tattoos test suggests that you were prepared to have a piece of real estate on your body with the brand, even if you leave the company. And that's a testament to the grandness of a purpose. A North Star has got to be bigger than just making money. It's got to be doing something that's bigger than just you. It doesn't have to be the world, but what world do you want to solve or help? And if you can do something that's sort of contributing at a higher level, then I'm prepared to do it. So for example, I worked at Redken, part of L'Oreal. I definitely make the difference. But should I be wearing tattoos, I would definitely have a tattoo of Redken or something of it in me. The back of my chair that I'm sitting on has Redken on it. I have so much garb that's still Redken, but no L'Oreal. And there's a reason for that.
So when we look at that, I've often seen, I think it's more of a case probably with bigger organizations that have been there for a longer time. As you mentioned before, sometimes you have a new CEO joining, they're not the founder, and the lifespan of a CEO tends to be, I don't know, what is it, 2, 3, 5 years, something like that. So I think both in terms of the ethics, but also in terms of like getting to the North Star, and having worked on a lot of transformation projects, you see the time frame they're given. Get something already back in like 3 months, maybe 6 months. Within a year, it's going to be questions if the budget's still committed and so on, because time's already running out. They might already looking for somebody else. If you haven't started with the start of a new CEO trying to make his or her name in the company. So in terms of limited timings, in terms of organizational or corporate turnover in people, what's still sort of the case for still chasing this, or maybe just being part of the setup and not being able to follow through? Is that achievable, or what's your findings on that?
Well, so the second chapter of my book really deals with governance. And I think that somehow when you are put into a position and the company's been existing for 100 years, you're just a mercenary, if I call it mercenary CEO, then you have to really understand your governance principles. And the chances are that you will be somewhat constrained in your abilities to move things around. You can't change the governance principles easily, especially if you only have a 3 to 5 year moment when you're going to do this. So you have to understand how much flexibility you have. Afterwards, there's a selection process. And do you join a company where you feel there's something going? Or you're just going to be a true mercenary and do it for the buck? So that there's a selection before you as an individual decide to take a position, manager or CEO, or whatever rank in between, you're going to do it. And then when you're in it, how much do you know yourself? Oh, yeah. Really, it's really interesting. I'm fascinated by ball bearings. They're really, I would love to sell more ball bearings. Really? I mean, maybe it's the spherical object and the beauty of the exactly perfectly dimensional, pie-oriented, filled ball bearing with some shiny luster that turns you on, much like a good scotch might in the evening. Fine. Or are you just doing it for the sake of having CEO on your business card? And so there's an element of, do you know yourself? And are you looking for you in the company? And that's an upfront exercise. Then afterwards, if you know your governance limitations, can you or can you not impact it? And afterwards, if you got a 3 to 5 year job and you're targeted like that, either you just agree to that, or you decide this is not for you, and you've got to make that decision within you. So if you decide, I'm going to run this company, I want to achieve success, 5 years is my thing, I don't care about ball bearings, I just want to achieve it, then inshallah, good luck to you.
Mm-hmm. Well, the other part as well, so I'm going to stick a little bit with time frame available for change or impact and so on. So you're saying somewhere, lending sufficient time to listen and learn is an important factor. And I'm sure I've had my fair share of experience where with a design thinking or service design background, you have a customer research, you want to treat everything as an assumption. That's sort of the mantra. And it's not always the organization doesn't always give you that time to learn and implement the right kind of learning cycle. And I wonder how much that is part of or allowed or part of, the leadership element as well, because in theory that should happen. In theory, the leadership level should learn as much as what happens with the teams on the ground, in the field, and so on. Learning should be across an organization. In my experience, learning is often quite subdued, not implemented in the right way. It's not made part of business as usual day to day. People are just taken out of context in a workshop, coming back, and then maybe or maybe not remembering 2 days later what they've just been doing. How does it work with leadership, given the expectations that many businesses have that the day you come in, yet again, time is the factor. Within a limited amount of time, you want to be effective. But organizations are highly complex entities. Do leaders learn or given the space to learn in your experience? And is that doable? Is that achievable?
So it's complicated.
Consultant
Because
answer.
no, because we're dealing with egos.
Mhm.
Are you going into the situation think you know it all already? I've done this job, 50 times. I know how to do it. Or are you going in there with like, I really have to rewire my brain? It's incredible how many stupid mistakes are made because of some bias or some preconceived notions in my mind. And as a leader, the issue, of course, is that you have less and less people feeding into you information. If you're the CEO, you have this sort of select group of people and you're far removed from reality. But the ego-headed individuals who say, well, it's not for me to go talk to the riffraff. It's not for me to learn about digital. Well, then of course you're really going to come up against some big obstacles that are in your 24-hour day time limit being what it is. You're going to take so much longer to make it happen. You might do things quickly, but they will not be the effective way. And as far as the learning component is, you have to have this sort of humility to say, I don't know everything, like Satya Nadella. I'm not a know-it-all. I want to be a learn-it-all. At the same time, you can't spend your entire day learning because you got to do shit. You have to decide. So first is to have the humility to say, I don't know everything, recognize that, hire people accordingly, spend a portion of your day. I like to dedicate a portion of my day to learning. But I do it in a time constrained way because it turns out I only have 24 hours in my day. So I want to make sure that systematically I'm doing something new. So whether it's, I'm an Apple boy, but hey, listen, show me a Samsung. What's the Android going like? Or try to make me shift around and make me unstable and know different things. And then finally, when it comes to organizational learning, I think it's all wrong. This whole idea of LFD, learning for development, and programs and webinars and all that. Well, we attribute you can go to that. We have budget for you to do that. But reality is, I think that everybody should be responsible for their own learning. And you have a portfolio, you can sign up for it or not. And because you're the only person, Marcus, that doesn't know what you don't know. I mean, knows that you don't know this stuff. So you should be completely responsibilized, given agency for the learning, and every day, not just the LFD stuff, but spending time learning in every part of your day. So that's continuous learning. So Marcus does what he does, Troy does what he does, Minter learns what he needs, and we're always in a constant learning. And that has to be exemplified by the CEO.
I think that's definitely true. I mean, given, for example, the project we had at BT, where we were literally learning on the job, we did hardly any outside learning in different workshops. We just had it straight there. Plus, as you said rightly so, and I think that's the same true both for tools and learning or whatever new process you want to, any change you want to bring to it, right? Change or upgrade you want to bring to it. Teams or people should know this themselves, or they likely know themselves best where they could do that. I think that's a really great point. I think when we talked to Geoff Colvin about that, about learning and new types of learning, he definitely agrees with that as well, where people themselves take themselves aback and like, oh, what did we just do? Let's reflect. Let's do our own reflection on what we've done ourselves in order to learn, not what someone else tells us to learn now. I think is really Really, really great point. And I think one more comment, or maybe one follow-up question on that one is, if we're learning like that, and maybe it's a very self-serving question and follow-up here is like, where do leadership really go for learning? We're having a podcast here about books, about business books. There's a lot of them. Some of us here have written some, and we've read a lot more. We look out into the organizations and sort of don't really see a lot of them implemented. There's knowledge that's been around for 50, 60 years. And one of the reasons is, yet again, this podcast trying to do the same again. And maybe someone will listen, hopefully, a few more. Where do leaders really go to learn? Do they only have time for the consultants to come in and have a sit together and that's it? Or do some really go out, or like some myths go, do they really read a book a week? Is that a typical CEO or something to do? What's your experience there? What do leaders really have time for in terms of learning? What do you reckon?
Love. So let me explain. I think that if you're going out for love, you don't kind of want to look for it. You need to create the environment for it to happen. You can't tell somebody, hey, love me. And I think in the same way of learning, you actually have to have an attitude to absorb and see and connect dots and allow the time for it to develop. So the interesting thing from the time constraint, of course, is our reality. But if we're in an ROI exercise, I need to read this book to learn this thing. Okay, 1, 2, 3, it's great. Mm-hmm. You might have learned one thing, but you're not in I would say, a bigger learning mode. And when we talk about podcasts, the interesting element is, or a conversation, should we rigorously insist that it's 20.2 minutes long? Because that's how long the average commute is? Or can we find ways to create an environment where we're listening to one another, engaging, connecting dots in different ways, learning and letting learning happen? So like love. So you don't just program love. You don't program learning. You need to let it happen. And so in the case of conversation, which is so cruelly lacking in our world today, where we have unfettered, long-form conversation, not happening. Yet in conversation, can I learn from you, Troy and Marcus, and from whomever, if I'm open to it? Anyway, that's how I like to answer it. Love.
It's a really interesting parallel, and I like the one comment, which is you let love happen, and you let learning happen, and you create the space for love. You create the space for learning. And I'm going to proxy that into another one of my questions. Relatively famous company, Gymshark, has just had phenomenal growth in the last 2 years. Relatively young founder, has done amazingly well. How do you give people advice on maintaining authenticity in times of hyper accelerated growth?
So that's not easy for everybody. There are people who are able to start up, work in a garage, tend to the fax machine, coffee machine, the sales, the marketing. And then there's the sitting in an office and pushing papers and sitting in meetings all day. And some are able to do both and some are not. And so I guess the real question for anybody who's in that position is, do you really want that or not? But not like because, oh, well, yeah, I want to be able to say that I've written a book kind of feeling, or do you love fucking writing? And that's I would say the mindset when it comes to that. Then a second thing is, and one of my paradoxes I talk about is truth versus storytelling. Say the facts, that's grounded. Storytelling, a little bit fishy. So the interesting thing about this is that, you do want to think about how you are going to exist in the future. And if at 0 days, you're starting to think about that. Well, that might be a little early, a little premature to be thinking about how it's going to be when I become IBM or whomever, because you've got $0 in the door. So let's just be a little bit real. Let's focus on it. At a certain point, though, you're going somewhere. You need to be able to project, like your North Star, where you want to go.
Mm-hmm.
And that becomes your guiding principle within that. And then that helps you to sort of configure your growth as you go along. Without that, you'll end up chasing whatever type of money, and you'll end up in the hamster mode, running after whatever, because I'm growing and I don't know why I'm growing. I don't know why I'm spinning, but this is it. And then all of a sudden you're going to be burned out.
You must have met one or two startup founders, because I recognize that particular arm flailing going there very, very well. I know it very well.
Well, I mean, of course, and the other thing, Troy, is that they are also being, someone's doing it in the background, putting like this, because they are called VC, private equity, or going to go public, and that's putting in the spoke, and they're feeding you some, spiked Kool-Aid, and you're in there. That's really exciting, and then all of a sudden, woof, the wheels fall off, or you fly up.
Right. So you mentioned your paradoxes, and I'm going to read from the title of the book, or the index. Number 1, we need to belong and yet be different. We need to understand our past yet live for the future. We must reconcile the quest for order in the presence of chaos, and we must seek truth but gravitate towards stories. And my underlying question is, each one of these seems to be a way to mitigate or manage risk. Are we addicted to kind of risk avoidance? Because I work currently for a client who's a major bank, and all they do, like literally a third of their day, is spent looking for where there might be risk and putting in controls and mitigations against it. How can we kind of embrace the fact that the world is a bit riskier?
All right. So I just realized, Troy, that I didn't close the loop on a thought before.
Oh, please do.
And I'm going to go back into the truth story, so that you're growing your company, you've got your North Star, hopefully you figured that out, and then you need to retrofit some kind of story. And the story needs to be romanced, because it's not exciting when I'm sitting in the oil, smoky, stinky garage. That's actually not very romantic. So you need to know how to craft a story, and then become a quantum storyteller as you go forward. And then that transports you along as you go forward, and hopefully towards your North Star. And it really is, in the end of the day, a narrative. There is no such thing as a North Star. I mean, there is, I suppose. It's out there. It's the shiny one. And for you, Troy, you might have your own personal North Star, and I certainly do, but it's a concept. And it will evolve, and my interpretation of it will evolve. If I told you it, you would have one meaning of it, and Marcus would have another. Anyway, that's the truth and the storytelling paradox kind of played out. As far as the risk component is, I funnily enough, I don't think of it as a risk avoiding story, these paradoxes. I think of it more as a letting go concept. And it's not one side or the other in these paradoxes. This is about managing both. And the fundamental principle that I feel about each of them is it's somehow about letting go of some hard facts that you are programmed to want to do. It's letting go perhaps about certain dogma that you feel is the only way to go, and allowing for more messiness in our humanity. So yes, there's a lot of people who are risk averse. I tend to feel actually that it's about allowing for more risk taking in these paradoxes. And as such, it's about being more personal, more tied into your emotions, that messy, gooey shit that we don't really want to put into work, because we're all about performance, damn it.
You've been to America one time too many.
I've been to many places, actually, that have performance. And generally speaking, it's boardrooms full of men.
So I'm going to kind of one last question, because we always have more questions than we have time.
All good.
But I think it kind of pulls into the emotional connections and to the riskiness. A friend of mine mentioned the other day a very important HSBC executive, Antonio Simoes, who is very high up within HSBC. He's from Portugal. And of course, because I'm now in Portugal, I'm thinking about these things more often, and I'm working adjacent to HSBC. And he is an out gay man. And it has been amazing for him. There's a nice Guardian article. We'll put the link to the article in the show notes about how it made him a better leader by being authentic about who he was. And as a gay man myself, it's always one of those things that I struggle with. At what point and when does it ever come out? And what happens? And when it does happen, and I'm in the right environment, I flourish. Absolutely. So I get it and I relate to it. And the question is, how can you, as an organization, as an enterprise, let the people, the leaders and the people on the front lines know it's okay to be you?
Well, I guess it depends a little bit on the who exactly is saying it's okay to be you, because, are you waiting for approval?
Well, that's what some people are. They're waiting for permission.
Right. And I think that's sort of the crux of the issue.
Mm.
If you don't have the agency, then you need to just dig in on what's stopping you being you. Is it your, father's opinion? Is it society's opinion? Where is it, and how comfortable are you with that? And ultimately, at some level, how sure are you about you? And being gay is one thing, but let's say I'm an axe murderer.
Mm.
Do I want to let that happen? And the answer is no. So you need to have an ethical concept with regard to who you are, allow for your imperfections. And I'm not suggesting for a second that homosexuality is an imperfection. I'm just talking about axe murder in this particular case. But because it's part of this issue is the imperfection story.
Right.
When you're accepting who you are, you're accepting the warts and your imperfections. And as soon as you're able to accept that, then that's really the big picture for me. As far as diversity is concerned, I love the Tim Cook way he has expressed himself. And I feel like he's at home with himself.
Mm.
And that makes it so much more obviously okay.
Yes, because it's not an issue for him.
That's right. If it comes from a bad place, and it's gonna bring with it chips on the shoulder, challenges, and that can confuse also our business concepts. One of the things, diversity, big topic, inclusion, and so on. White males as we are, the challenge is, and I think on podcasts, I think is really interesting. I get plugged by 80% of the time white males.
Mm.
And yet that's not exactly the representation of the world.
No.
So something is wrong there. But having diversity for diversity's sake is not good. It's like having purpose for purpose's sake.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that's key for me is having, as an individual, I would say leaning into your own sense of self, accepting your foibles. For me, I took a while to come up with and say, well, hey, I took LSD 300 times. As a CEO of a company, that could be risky business.
Mm-hmm.
But I will tell you that it rewired my mind. It made me aware of the consciousness of our smallness, of my ridiculousness in this universe. And I think that brought me a lot more than if I stuck with the party line, so to speak. So comfortable with my own imperfections, and then conceive of diversity, not necessarily of sexuality or race or sex, but diversity of spirit, diversity of thought. I think that's a more powerful concept, because if you go out of business, having a rainbow, no good.
Pragmatic again.
I think it's necessary to be a little pragmatic, and where companies do it wrong is that, like an HSBC in general, is that they do policies by process, almost by committees, and committees dummies you down. And so that's how they have that reputation of being conservative, bureaucratic, because they've sort of trying to please everybody all the time. You need to know what you stand for, and then be prepared to have the courage to go for it.
Yeah, and that applies to leaders and people across the organization. I'm afraid we are now out of time. Marcus, do you have any closing thoughts before we say goodbye to our friendly guest?
Yeah, I have, and I think it's. I really enjoyed that we end up on a big subject, on a very deep thought here. I think is really brilliant. And when you started talking about, gender or sexuality, I mean, we our first couple of episodes were all with white males, till someone, to our all an apologies, like pointed out, you need to get some women in here. It's like, yeah, but it's mainly business books are very often written by white males, and there's an obvious bias here. But basically, the bias aspect is actually really interesting there. So as much as we talk about those aspects, at many times we had coming up where basically just anyone on the table being listened to, people being confident enough just to speak. And we can talk about subtle things like being more extrovert or introvert. The introverts statistically maybe not bringing themselves in that much, or because you think you have a flaw, you don't know as much, you might not want to bring yourself in that much. You okay, madam? Sorry, I have a little visitor here. But essentially, to have every voice listened to, because we know statistically as well that diverse teams and different viewpoints together de-risk and bring in better solutions, and that even the best leaders are biased. We really gain from that. So I think it was a great finishing thought here to start with something that might be a bit more sensible or more harder to manifest, but this trickles all the way down into the very subtleties of our individual fears and so on. And I think it's a very important and great thought we have to at the end, I think.
I'd like to just add a couple of thoughts. One is, there's nothing worse than identifying a Black person, Black man, woman, to be head of diversity. It really should be incarnated by the people who have some influence and leadership within the company. And by the way, you can't just give diversity to an individual. Diversity needs to be...
Quite a conversation going on over there.
It's a four-way. All of a sudden, it's a four-way. So you need to avoid the idea. You need to avoid the idea of having diversity being a title or just some thing on the wall. It needs to be incarnated by everybody, just like sustainable development. And I studied women's studies at university, and I would prescribe that all white males and males in general take women's studies, because it really opens the eyes, and typical of the study and women in general, it wasn't just relegated to women. It was actually the study of all minority voices. And it really opened my eyes to this. And the challenge that, especially as a white male, we have is finding a reasonable discourse. Because either you go party line, this is what I should say, or I feel for something, I stand for something, and not afraid to push it. Because if it's full of cotton wool in my mouth, you're going to know it. And so you've got to be real. I wear a rugby shirt. It's an all black rugby shirt. I played rugby for 18 years. And I'll never forget a time when I'm in the locker room. We've just won a match. And a couple of the boys said some rather ugly things about a gay guy. About on the other team. And I said, we don't need to say that. And then they all looked at me. And there was that horrible moment of ostracization. So this is, the heterosexual speaking in a rugby team. And I was like, well, wait a second, you guys, we're better than that, aren't we? And somehow in those moments, you need to have the courage to stand up, because it's the heterosexual white male that still today has the power, is driving things, is getting on podcasts, is writing these business books. And it is behoved on us to lead the way, because that's the way it is. So if someone's not speaking up at a table, hey, Gemma, I've noticed you didn't say anything. Make sure you please contribute. And calling people in and giving them permission to weigh in, because if it's quiet diversity, that's no good either. So you need to be able to model the behavior, accept different. Mentor, you're full of shit. Thank you. Thank you for that feedback. Please explain.
Great.
Yeah.
Go on, Marcus.
Are we going? So yeah, but I had the same, when you have too many guys in the room and suddenly there's quite sexist jokes going around, and even in a professional sense where you just have to stop it right away. And because those things can be quite toxic. And I think, it goes back to your authenticity. It's like, that's what you stand for. And I think being honest to what you stand for gives you power. And I felt the same, you have these moments where you feel maybe ostracized, especially when you're literally in a room with a client, for example, like I was, to really tell the client off is a bit of a thing. But I think you get respected more afterwards, because you're actually yourself. And you said, yeah, well, those are my beliefs. Here you go. Brilliant. I think we really have to wrap up. This has been absolutely great. Minter, thank you so much for your insights and for your time. It was splendid. So thank you. Thank you very much.
It's been my pleasure.
You've been listening to The Wicked Podcast with co-host Marcus Kirsch and me, Troy Norcross.
Please subscribe on Podomatic, iTunes, or Spotify. You can find all relevant links in the show notes. Please tell us your thoughts in the comment section and let us know about any books for future episodes.
You can also get in touch with us directly on Twitter on @WickedandBeyond or @Troy_Norcross. Also, learn more about the Wicked Company book and the Wicked Company project at wickedcompany.com.